When Master Sergeant Cole Phantom Harrison placed his custom Barrett M82 sniper rifle, the same weapon he'd carried through 3 combat tours, into the trembling hands of Sofia Reeves, every person at the Phoenix Veterans Recovery Institute thought they were witnessing either an act of madness or a miracle. This was the same woman they'd labeled hopeless, the veteran who couldn't hold a coffee cup steady, couldn't remember basic instructions, and who'd been recommended for immediate discharge just weeks earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the Phoenix Veterans Recovery Institute as Sofia Reeves stepped out of the government transport van, her single duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her left hand trembling uncontrollably. The tremor had started 6 months ago in a field hospital in Afghanistan, and despite every medication, every therapy, every prayer, it hadn't stopped shaking since. At 28, Sofia looked older, much older than her years. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her once pristine military bearing had crumbled into the uncertain posture of someone who no longer trusted their own body. The Phoenix Veterans Recovery Institute sprawled across 20 acres of desert landscape, its modern buildings designed to blend seamlessly with the rust-colored mountains in the distance. This wasn't a hospital, exactly, but it wasn't a traditional rehabilitation center either. It was something new, something experimental, a place where the military sent veterans who didn't fit into conventional recovery programs, the broken ones, the complicated cases, the soldiers who'd come back from war carrying invisible wounds that defied easy treatment. Sofia had been a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne, deployed twice to Afghanistan where she'd saved dozens of lives under enemy fire. She'd been fast, precise, and fearless, the kind of medic who could start in 4 in the back of a moving Humvee while taking incoming fire. But that was before the IED explosion that had killed 3 of her closest friends and left her with traumatic brain injury, severe PTSD, and a neurological tremor that made even the simplest tasks feel impossible. Sofia Reeves? The voice belonged to Dr. Michael Foster, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen every type of trauma the human mind could endure. He approached her with a clipboard and a warm smile that didn't quite hide his concern as he noticed her shaking hand. "Welcome to Phoenix. I'm Dr. Foster, one of the program coordinators here." Sofia attempted to return his handshake, but her tremor made the gesture awkward and embarrassing. She pulled her hand back quickly, stuffing it into her jacket pocket where the shaking wouldn't be so obvious. "Yes, sir. Reporting as ordered." The formality in her voice carried the weight of someone still trying to hold on to military protocol, even as everything else in her life had fallen apart. Dr. Foster noticed this immediately, the way she stood at attention despite her obvious exhaustion, the way she called him sir even though he was a civilian, the way she held herself together through sheer force of will. "This isn't the military anymore, Sofia," Dr. Foster said gently. "You can call me Michael. And you're not reporting for duty, you're here to heal. There's a difference." As they walked toward the main building, Sofia caught sight of other veterans scattered across the facility's grounds. Some were in wheelchairs, others walked with canes or prosthetic limbs. A few sat in small groups on benches, talking quietly, or staring off into the distance with the 1,000-yard stare she knew all too well. These were her people, the walking wounded, the ones who'd given everything for their country and were still trying to figure out how to live with what they'd received in return. The intake process was thorough and humiliating in the way that all medical evaluations seemed to be. Sofia sat in a sterile office answering questions about her symptoms, her triggers, her medications, and her prognosis. The neurologist who examined her tremor was professional but blunt. "The nerve damage is extensive," Dr. Patricia Kim explained, watching Sofia struggle to hold a pen steady enough to sign forms. The traumatic brain injury has affected your motor control, and the tremor may be permanent. We'll work on management strategies, but I want to set realistic expectations. Realistic expectations. Sofia had heard that phrase more times than she could count over the past 6 months. It was medical speak for "you're probably not getting better." She nodded numbly and tried to ignore the way Dr. Kim's eyes lingered on her shaking hand with what looked suspiciously like pity. The real shock came during her first group therapy session. Sofia found herself in a circle with 8 other veterans, all dealing with various combinations of PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and physical disabilities. The group was led by Amanda Sterling, a former Army colonel who transitioned into rehabilitation psychology after losing her left leg to an IED in Iraq. Sterling was tough, no nonsense, and had a reputation for pushing veterans harder than they sometimes wanted to be pushed. "Let's start with introductions," Sterling said, her gaze sweeping the circle. "Name, unit, and what brought you here." "Sofia." "You're new, why don't you go first?" Sofia's mouth went dry. Public speaking had never been a problem before her injury, but now the combination of brain fog and anxiety made even simple conversations feel like climbing mountains. "Sofia Reeves, 82nd Airborne Combat Medic. I'm here because double quotes." She paused, searching for the right words. The tremor in her left hand intensified, and she gripped her knee to try to still it. "Because I can't do my job anymore." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Sterling's expression didn't change, but Sofia caught the way her eyes flicked to the trembling hand, cataloging another limitation, another challenge that might prove insurmountable. "What specifically can't you do?" Sterling pressed, her tone clinical and direct. Sofia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I can't start IVs, can't draw blood, can't perform any medical procedures that require fine motor control. I can barely hold a coffee cup without spilling it." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and she hated herself for the show of weakness. "And what does your medical team say about recovery prospects?" The question felt like a knife twist. Sofia met Sterling's gaze directly, drawing on the last reserves of her military bearing. "They say the tremor is likely permanent, that I should focus on adapting to civilian life and finding work that doesn't require manual dexterity." Sterling nodded, making notes on her ever-present clipboard. The other veterans in the circle shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the tone of an evaluation that wasn't going well. This wasn't therapy, this was assessment, and Sofia was failing it in real time. "I see," Sterling said finally. "And what are your goals for this program?" Sofia had prepared for this question, but now, sitting in the circle with Sterling's skeptical gaze boring into her, the answer felt naive and foolish. "I want to be a medic again. I want to serve. I want to be useful." The silence that followed was telling. Sofia could see it in Sterling's expression, the polite but unmistakable look of someone who'd just heard an impossible dream. She'd seen that look on doctors' faces, on her family's faces, on her own face in the mirror when she was being honest with herself. "Sofia," Sterling said, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone delivering bad news, "I appreciate your dedication, but we need to be realistic about what's achievable. The tremor you're experiencing, combined with the cognitive effects of your TBI, makes medical work extremely challenging. Our program is designed to help veterans find new purposes, new careers that work with their current capabilities, not against them." Translation: "You're broken, and you need to accept it." The rest of the session passed in a blur of other veterans sharing their stories, their struggles, their small victories, and major setbacks. Sofia barely heard any of it. She was too busy processing the reality that even here, in this place specifically designed for complicated cases, she was being written off as too damaged to fix. After the session, as the other veterans filed out, talking quietly among themselves, Sofia remained in her chair, staring at her hands. The left one continued its relentless tremor, a constant reminder that her body had betrayed her in the most fundamental way possible. She'd always been someone who fixed things, wounded soldiers, broken equipment, impossible situations. But she couldn't fix herself. Tough first day? The voice startled her. She looked up to see a man standing in the doorway, tall, lean, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in harsh conditions. His hair was graying at the temples, and his blue eyes held the particular intensity that Sofia recognized immediately. This was a shooter, someone who'd spent years looking through scopes at targets measured in miles rather than meters. "You could say that," Sofia replied, finally standing and shouldering her bag. "And you are?" "Master Sergeant Cole Harrison," he said, extending his hand. "Most people around here call me Ghost. I run the precision training program." Sofia shook his hand, acutely aware of her tremor as she did so. "Precision training? I didn't know the program offered that." Ghost's smile was enigmatic. "It doesn't officially. But some of us believe there's more than one way to serve, and more than one definition of precision." He studied her for a moment, and Sofia had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "I heard about your background. Combat medic, 2 deployments, exemplary service record until the injury." "That's right," Sofia said carefully, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Precision work," Ghost observed. "Starting in 4 in the back of a moving vehicle under fire, that takes a steady hand and a steady mind. Both of which you clearly had in abundance." Sofia's laugh was bitter. "Had being the operative phrase. As you can see, steady isn't exactly my strong suit anymore." Ghost was quiet for a moment, still studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "You know," he said finally, "I've been in this business for a long time. Seen a lot of soldiers. Worked with snipers from every branch of service. And in my experience, the steadiest hands don't always belong to the people who shake the least." Before Sofia could ask what he meant by that cryptic comment, Ghost had turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the empty therapy room with more questions than answers. That night, as Sofia lay in her narrow bunk in the dormitory-style housing, she stared at the ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened. In one day, she'd been evaluated, categorized, and essentially told that her dreams of returning to medical service were unrealistic. She'd been labeled as someone who needed to lower her expectations and find a new purpose. But there had been something in Ghost's eyes, something in the way he'd talked about precision and service, that suggested he saw things differently. Sofia didn't know what the precision training program involved, or why a master sergeant was running unauthorized courses at a veterans rehabilitation facility. What she did know was that for the first time since her injury, someone had looked at her and seen more than just limitations. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sofia couldn't shake the feeling that her real education at the Phoenix Veterans Recovery Institute was about to begin. And it would have nothing to do with the official program that had already written her off as a hopeless case. The tremor in her left hand continued its relentless rhythm, but for the first time in months, Sofia fell asleep without the crushing weight of despair pressing down on her chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a way forward that no one had thought to show her yet. Sofia's second day at Phoenix began at 0600 hours with what Amanda Sterling euphemistically called functional assessment training. The gymnasium had been converted into an obstacle course designed to test fine motor skills, cognitive function, and stress response, everything that Sofia's injuries had compromised. 12 veterans stood in a line, each facing a series of stations that would measure their readiness for reintegration into productive civilian life. Today's evaluation will determine your individual training tracks, Sterling announced, clipboard in hand and stopwatch around her neck. We'll be measuring speed, accuracy, and adaptability across 7 different skill sets. Your performance will directly impact the resources allocated to your rehabilitation. The unspoken message was clear: perform well, and you'd get advanced. Training opportunities. Perform poorly, and you'd be shuffled into basic life skills classes with the other lost causes. Station 1 was medical simulation, Sofia's area of supposed expertise. A mannequin lay on an examination table, and the task was simple. Start in 4. Take vital signs and perform a basic wound assessment. The same procedure Sofia had done thousands of times in combat zones, often under enemy fire. The same procedures that had defined her identity as a soldier and a healer. Sofia approached the mannequin with her medical kit, trying to ignore the way her left hand shook as she opened the 4 supplies. The other veterans watched, some with sympathy, others with barely concealed relief that they weren't the ones struggling so obviously. Derek Thompson, a former infantry sergeant who'd lost 2 fingers to shrapnel, stood at the next station with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. "This should be interesting," Derek muttered to the veteran beside him. "Watch the medic who can't hold a needle steady." Sofia tried to block out the comment, focusing instead on the familiar ritual of medical care. She wrapped the tourniquet around the mannequin's arm, palpated for a vein, and prepared the forecatheter. Her right hand was steady. It had always been her non-dominant hand, and the neurological damage hadn't affected it. But threading the 4 required both hands, and as soon as she tried to advance the catheter with her left hand, the tremor betrayed her. The needle skittered across the mannequin's arm, missing the vein entirely. Sofia took a deep breath and tried. Again, another miss. The tremor seemed to get worse under the pressure of being watched, as if her nervous system was feeding off the anxiety and amplifying the very problem she was trying to overcome. "Time," Sterling called out after what felt like an eternity, but had only been 3 minutes. "Move to the next station." Sofia hadn't successfully started the 4. The vital signs she'd managed to obtain were accurate but slow, and her wound assessment had been thorough but time-consuming. In a real emergency, she would have been too slow to save a life. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Station 2 tested cognitive function under pressure pattern recognition, memory retention, and problem-solving while dealing with loud noises and flashing lights designed to simulate combat stress. Sofia had always excelled at thinking clearly under pressure. It was one of the traits that had made her an exceptional combat medic. But now, with her brain still healing from the traumatic injury, the cognitive load felt overwhelming. The patterns swam before her eyes. The loud sounds triggered flashbacks to the explosion that had ended her career, and her hands shook so badly that she could barely mark the answer sheets. Around her, other veterans worked through their own challenges, some struggling with memory, others with physical coordination. All of them fighting battles that weren't visible from the outside. By Station 4, which tested fine motor skills. Through electronics assembly, Sofia was fighting back tears of frustration. The small components might as well have been dancing in her vision, and her tremor made precise manipulation impossible. She watched Derek Thompson, despite his missing fingers, complete the assembly task with adaptive techniques that worked around his disability. His success only highlighted her failure. "Having trouble there, Doc?" Derek called out, his voice carrying just loud enough for others to hear. "Maybe they should have sent you to a different kind of rehab program." Sterling appeared at Sofia's shoulder, observing her struggle with the electronics components. "Sofia, I think we need to have a realistic conversation about your capabilities. This level of tremor, combined with the cognitive effects we're seeing, suggests that returning to any kind of medical work may not be feasible." The words hit Sofia like ice water. Not just devastating, but delivered with the clinical detachment of someone who'd already made up her mind. "Ma'am, this is just one bad day. In Afghanistan, I performed surgery in sandstorms while taking incoming fire. I can learn to work around this." Sterling's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. "Sofia, I respect your service and your determination, but adaptation has limits. Some injuries can't be overcome with willpower alone. The kindest thing I can do is help you accept that and find a new path forward." The rest of the assessment passed in a blur of failure and frustration. Balance tests that Sofia failed due to lingering effects from her concussion. Strength assessments that revealed how much muscle mass she'd lost during months of recovery. Coordination drills that highlighted every tremor, every hesitation, every way that her body was no longer the reliable instrument it had once been. When the formal testing concluded, Sterling gathered all 12 veterans in the gymnasium for individual feedback. Sofia sat in a plastic chair, trying to maintain military bearing while inside she felt like she was dissolving. One by one, Sterling called out names and assigned training tracks. Johnson, Advanced Vocational Rehabilitation with Computer Programming Focus. Martinez, Physical Therapy with Adaptive Sports Integration. Thompson, Leadership Development and Peer Counseling track. Each assignment represented hope, a future where the veterans' remaining abilities would be developed and utilized. Sofia waited, knowing that whatever she heard wouldn't be good news. "Reeves," Sterling finally called out. "Basic life skills with occupational therapy support. Focus on daily living activities and stress management." The gymnasium fell silent. Basic life skills was the track reserved for veterans with the most severe disabilities, those who needed to relearn how to function in the simplest aspects of daily life. It wasn't training for a career or a purpose. It was training to exist. Without being a burden to others, Sofia felt the stares of the other veterans, some sympathetic, others relieved that they hadn't been assigned to the hopeless track. Derek Thompson didn't even try to hide his smirk. "Ma'am," Sofia said, her voice carefully controlled, "I'd like to request additional evaluation. I know I can do better than this." Sterling's expression was kind but final. "Sofia, these assessments are comprehensive and designed by leading experts in veteran rehabilitation. The tremor, the cognitive effects, the stress response, they're all interconnected, and they're all limiting your functional capacity in ways that can't be wished away." That evening, Sofia sat alone in the facility's common room, staring out at the desert landscape and trying to process what felt like the final nail in the coffin of her military identity. She'd gone from being a highly skilled combat medic to someone who needed basic life skills training. The fall felt infinite. "Rough day?" Sofia turned to see Master Sergeant Cole Ghost Harrison standing behind her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered her one, which she accepted gratefully, trying not to let him see how her hand shook as she took it. "You could say that." Sofia took a sip of the coffee, surprised by how good it was. "I'm officially a basket case now, basic life skills track. They're going to teach me how to tie my shoes and balance a checkbook." Ghost settled into the chair beside her, his movements economical and precise. "And you believe that assessment?" The question caught Sofia off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you believe that someone who performed combat medicine under fire for 2 deployments is really suited for nothing more than basic life skills?" Ghost's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that suggested he disagreed with Sterling's assessment. Sofia gestured at her trembling hand. "The evidence is pretty clear. I can't perform the skills that defined my entire military career. Hell, I can barely hold this coffee cup steady." Ghost was quiet for a moment, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "You know what I see when I look at you, Sofia? I see someone who's been told that her injury defines her limitations. But in my experience, limitations are often just starting points for innovation." "Innovation doesn't cure nerve damage," Sofia said bitterly. "No," Ghost agreed. "But it finds ways around it. Different ways, better ways sometimes." He paused, then leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, when you were in Afghanistan, did you ever have to perform medical procedures in less than ideal conditions?" Sofia almost laughed at the understatement. "Every day. Sandstorms, incoming fire, no proper lighting, moving vehicles, patients who were combative or unconscious. And you adapted to those conditions. Found ways to work around them. That was different. My hands worked then. Ghost nodded slowly. Your hands worked differently then. But you're assuming that the way you used to do things is the only way to do them. He stood up, finishing his coffee. I run a small program here, off the books. It's not about teaching people to work within their limitations. It's about teaching them to transcend them. Sofia looked up at him, not daring to hope. What kind of program? Precision training. Different kind of precision than what you're used to, but precision nonetheless. Ghost's smile was enigmatic. If you're interested in finding out whether you're really as hopeless as they think, meet me at the old firing range tomorrow at 0500. And Sofia? Yes, bring your medical kit. As Ghost walked away, Sofia felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. She had no idea what precision training involved, or how it might relate to her medical background. What she did know was that for the second time in 2 days, someone was suggesting that maybe, just maybe, she was more than the sum of her disabilities. Outside, the desert night was clear and cold. Stars scattered across the darkness like possibilities she'd forgotten existed. Sofia finished her coffee, her tremor still present, but somehow feeling less like a life sentence and more like a challenge waiting to be solved. Sofia arrived at the old firing range at 0455 hours, her medical kit slung over her shoulder and her hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee to hide the tremor. The range was located on the far edge of the Phoenix facility grounds, an abandoned relic from the Institute's earlier days when it had been a military training base. Concrete barriers stood like silent sentinels in the pre-dawn darkness, and the wooden target stands looked like skeletal remains bleached white by years of desert sun. Ghost was already there, setting up equipment at a shooting bench with the methodical precision of someone who'd performed the same ritual thousands of times. His personal rifle case lay open beside him, revealing a weapon that was clearly custom-built and lovingly maintained. Even in the dim light, Sofia could see the quality of the optics, the precision of the stockwork, the kind of attention to detail that spoke of absolute commitment to the craft. "You came," Ghost said without looking up from his preparations. "Good. Most people who hear my offer don't have the courage to follow through. What exactly am I following through on?" Sofia asked, settling her medical kit on the concrete bench. "You said precision training, but this looks like a shooting range." Ghost finally looked at her, his expression unreadable in the pre-dawn shadows. "Precision takes many forms, Sofia. Medical precision, shooting precision, they're not as different as you might think. Both require steady hands, controlled breathing, and the ability to perform under pressure when lives are at stake." Sofia gestured at her trembling left hand. "In case you hadn't noticed, steady hands aren't exactly my strong suit anymore." "Show me your shooting stance," Ghost said, ignoring her comment. "I'm sorry, what?" "Basic rifle marksmanship. Every soldier learns it in boot camp. Show me your stance." Sofia hesitated. She hadn't touched a weapon since her injury, hadn't even thought about shooting. The whole point of her medical career had been saving lives, not taking them. But something in Ghost's tone suggested this wasn't a request. She moved to the firing line and assumed the prone position she'd learned years ago, though her left arm shook as she tried to support an imaginary rifle. "Like this?" Ghost observed her critically, walking around her position and studying her form from different angles. "Your right side is stable, strong base, good bone support. But you're trying to use your left hand the same way you always did." He knelt beside her. "What if you didn't have to?" Before Sofia could ask what he meant, Ghost produced a modified rifle from his case, not his personal weapon, but something that looked like it had been extensively customized. The stock was adjustable, the grip was non-standard, and there were additional supports and stabilizers that Sofia had never seen before. This is a precision rifle that's been adapted for shooters with various physical limitations, Ghost explained. The key isn't fighting your tremor, it's working with it, around it, through it. Sofia stared at the weapon, confused. I don't understand. How does learning to shoot help me be a medic again? Ghost's smile was patient, but enigmatic. Trust the process, Sofia. Precision is precision. Whether you're threading a needle or threading a bullet through a target at 800 yards. The principles are the same. Breathing, trigger control, follow through, and most importantly, understanding that your body is just a tool. It's your mind that makes the precision possible. For the next hour, Ghost walked Sofia through basic marksmanship principles adapted for her condition. Instead of trying to eliminate the tremor, he taught her to time her shots between the oscillations. Instead of fighting the shaking, he showed her how to use breathing techniques to minimize its impact. Instead of relying on her damaged left hand for fine motor control, he demonstrated grip modifications that transferred the precision work to her uninjured right side. By 063, other veterans were beginning their morning routines, and Sofia could see figures moving around the main facility buildings. Ghost packed up his equipment quickly, but not before handing Sofia a small notebook similar to his own, but blank. Start keeping track, he said. Wind conditions, temperature, humidity. Your physical state, your mental state. Everything affects precision, and if you want to get better, you need to understand all the variables. Better at what, exactly? Sofia asked, though she was already tucking the notebook into her jacket pocket. We'll see, Ghost replied. Meet me here tomorrow, same time. And Sofia? Don't mention this to anyone else. Not yet. The rest of Sofia's day proceeded according to her assigned schedule. Basic life skills training with Dr. Foster. Occupational therapy focused on adaptive techniques. For daily living, and group sessions where she was supposed to process her adjustment to permanent disability. The contrast between Ghost's morning training and the institutional assumption of her hopelessness was jarring. During lunch, Sofia sat alone at a corner table in the cafeteria, picking at her food and reviewing the notebook Ghost had given her. She'd started making entries about the morning's session wind direction, temperature, her tremor severity, her stress level, and was surprised to find patterns emerging even from a single training session. What's that you're writing there, Doc? Derek Thompson's voice cut through her concentration like a rusty blade. He'd approached her table with his usual crew of followers, 3 other veterans who seemed to take pleasure in his casual cruelty. Derek had established himself as the alpha of their particular social hierarchy, and part of maintaining that position involved identifying and targeting the weakest members of the group. Just notes, Sofia said, closing the notebook and trying to finish her lunch without engaging. Notes about what? How to tie your shoes without shaking. Derek's companions laughed at his joke, and Sofia felt heat rise in her cheeks. I heard you got assigned to baby training, basic life skills. That's what they give to the real head cases. Sofia kept eating, trying to ignore the comments, but Derek wasn't finished. He sat down at her table without invitation, his artificial hand a high-tech prosthetic that he wore like a badge of honor drumming against the surface. You know what I think? Derek continued, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. I think they made a mistake letting you in. Here, this program is for veterans who got hurt serving their country, not for people who just couldn't handle the pressure. The implication was clear and cruel. Sofia's injuries weren't legitimate combat wounds, but signs of personal weakness. It was the kind of attack that cut deepest because it played on her own fears and self-doubt. I was wounded in action, same as you, Sofia said quietly, still not looking up from her food. Derek laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the cafeteria. Wounded? You mean you had a panic attack and shook yourself out of a job? That's not wounded, Doc, that's just pathetic. The cafeteria had gone quiet. Other veterans watching the confrontation with the uncomfortable fascination of people witnessing a car accident. Sofia felt every eye on her, measuring her response, judging whether she would fight back or fold under the pressure. She closed her notebook carefully and stood up, meeting Derek's gaze directly for the first time. "You're right about one thing. Derek, I can't do a lot of things I used to do. My hands shake, my memory isn't perfect, and I failed every assessment they gave me. But at least I'm trying to get better instead of tearing down other people to make myself feel superior." Derek's expression darkened. "At least I can hold a rifle without dropping it. At least I'm not pretending I can go back to being something. I'm not. And at least I'm not such a coward that I have to pick on someone who's already down to feel like a man." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Derek's prosthetic hand clenched into a fist, and for a moment, Sofia thought he might actually try to hit her. The other veterans were watching intently now, some recording the confrontation on their phones. Instead, Derek stood up slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "You want to know what everyone's really thinking, DOC? We're all waiting for you to wash out. To quit and go home to whatever sad little life you had before you came here pretending to be a soldier. Because that's what you are, a pretender. And sooner or later, everyone's going to see it." He walked away with his crew, leaving Sofia standing alone by the table with every person in the cafeteria staring at her. She could see the mixture of emotions on their faces, some sympathetic, others embarrassed for her, a few clearly agreeing with Derek's assessment. Sofia picked up her tray and walked to the dish return area, her head held high despite the tremor in her hands and the burning shame in her chest. She'd stood up to Derek, but his words had found their target. Deep down, she was afraid he was right. Maybe she was pretending to be something she could never be again. That afternoon, during her occupational therapy session, the humiliation continued in subtler but equally devastating ways. The therapist, a well-meaning young woman named Jennifer, had Sofia practice basic tasks like buttoning shirts, writing checks, and preparing simple meals, all while her tremor made each action a monumental challenge. "The key is accepting your new normal," Jennifer explained as Sofia struggled to sign her name legibly. "Once you stop fighting the tremor and start working with it, you'll find that many daily activities are still possible, just different. New normal, another euphemism for permanent disability." Sofia nodded and continued practicing, but her mind was elsewhere, thinking about Ghost's morning session and the way he'd talked about precision as something that could be adapted rather than lost. By evening, Sofia had acquired a nickname that was already spreading through the facility: Shaky. She heard it whispered in the hallways, saw it in the way people looked at her, felt it in the careful distance that other veterans maintained. Derek had successfully marked her as the group's designated victim, the one it was safe to mock because she couldn't or wouldn't fight back effectively. As she prepared for bed, Sofia found herself looking forward to the next morning's secret session with Ghost. It was the only part of her day that didn't feel like an exercise in documenting her limitations. Whatever he was teaching her, however it connected to her medical background, it was the only thing that felt like moving forward rather than just managing decline. She opened the notebook he'd given her and made one final entry for the day. Day 3 at Phoenix. Failed all assessments. Assigned to basic life skills. Confronted Derek Thompson. Acquired nickname Shaky. Beginning to understand that the real battle isn't against my tremor, it's against everyone who's already decided what I'm capable of. Outside her window, the desert night was vast and full of stars. Somewhere out there was a firing range where precision meant something different than what the doctors and therapists thought possible. Sofia closed the notebook and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring either more evidence that she was truly hopeless, or the first real proof that she might be something more than the sum of her disabilities. Ghost watched Sofia from the shadows of the equipment shed as she made her way to the firing range for their fourth morning session. Her gait was different now, more purposeful, less defeated than when she'd first arrived at Phoenix. The tremor was still there, would always be there, but she was learning to carry it differently. Like a scar that told a story instead of a wound that defined limitations. What the other veterans didn't know, what Amanda Sterling and her assessment teams couldn't see, was that Ghost had been observing Sofia since her first day at the facility. Not obviously, not in ways that would attract attention, but with the patient methodology of someone who'd spent a career studying targets through high-powered scopes. He'd watched her struggle through the humiliating assessments, witnessed Derek Thompson's casual cruelty, seen the way she held herself together, even as everything around her suggested she should fall apart. Most importantly, he'd noticed things that others missed during that first disastrous medical simulation. While everyone focused on Sofia's trembling hands and missed IV attempts, Ghost had observed her diagnostic process. She'd correctly identified signs of shock that the other veterans missed entirely. Her assessment of the mannequin's fictional wounds had been textbook perfect, delivered with the kind of systematic precision that spoke of deep training and natural aptitude. Her hands might shake, but her mind was still sharp as a surgical blade. "You're early today," Ghost said as Sofia approached the firing line. Her medical kit and the notebook he'd given her, both secured in a military-style messenger bag. "Couldn't sleep," Sofia admitted, setting down her equipment. "Derek and his crew decided to serenade me with combat sounds from their phones until about 0200. Apparently, they wanted to see if I'd have a panic attack." Ghost's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd heard about the psychological harassment Sofia was enduring, the way certain veterans used her visible disability as entertainment. It was the kind of behavior that would have resulted in immediate disciplinary action in an active duty unit, but the Phoenix facility operated under different rules. Here, peer dynamics were considered part of the therapeutic process, even when those dynamics turned toxic. "And did you?" Ghost asked, beginning his morning equipment setup. "Have a panic attack?" Sofia's smile was grim but genuine. "No, I put in earplugs and reviewed my shooting notes from yesterday. Figured if they wanted to keep me awake, I might as well use the time productively." This was exactly what Ghost had been hoping to see: resilience, adaptability, the refusal to be broken by circumstances beyond her control. Sofia was learning to use her supposed weaknesses as sources of strength, and that transformation was precisely what his unconventional training program was designed to foster. "Show me yesterday's entries," Ghost said, extending his hand for the notebook. Sofia passed it over, watching nervously as Ghost reviewed her meticulously detailed observations. She'd documented everything: wind speed and direction at 5-minute intervals, temperature fluctuations, her tremor severity on a scale of 1 to 10, her stress levels, even her caffeine intake and sleep quality. The entries showed his systematic mind trying to understand and control every variable that might affect performance. "Excellent work," Ghost said, and Sofia could hear the genuine approval in his voice. "You're starting to think like a precision shooter. Every variable matters. Every condition affects the outcome, and the only way to achieve consistency is through complete awareness of your environment and your body's response to it." "But I'm still missing half my shots," Sofia pointed out, her frustration evident. "And the ones I do hit are nowhere near the center of the target." Ghost nodded thoughtfully. "Sofia, let me tell you something about precision shooting that most people never understand. It's not about being perfect, it's about being consistent. A shooter who can put every round in the same place, even if that place is 2 inches off center, is more valuable than someone who occasionally hits a bullseye, but can't repeat the performance." He walked over to the target stand and pointed to Sofia's shot group from the previous day. The bullets had indeed missed the bullseye, but they were clustered tightly together in a pattern that spoke of controlled, repeatable technique. Your tremor creates a natural rhythm, Ghost continued. Instead of fighting it, you're learning to time your shots to work with that rhythm. The result is a shooting pattern that's predictable and correctable. That's the foundation of real precision. For the next hour, Ghost guided Sofia through increasingly complex shooting exercises. Instead of the traditional bullseye targets used in basic marksmanship training, he'd set up scenarios that mimicked real-world precision challenges, targets at varying distances, wind flags to read atmospheric conditions, and time constraints that required quick but accurate decision-making. What emerged during these sessions was something that surprised even Ghost. Sofia's medical training had given her an intuitive understanding of anatomy, ballistics, and the physics of projectile motion. When he explained how wind drift affected bullet trajectory, she immediately grasped the concepts and began making accurate corrections. When he taught her about reading terrain and atmospheric conditions, she connected the lessons to her experience treating casualties in various environmental conditions. Most remarkably, her tremor, the disability that everyone saw as an insurmountable limitation, was actually teaching her a form of trigger control that most shooters took years to develop. The constant motion forced her to find moments of stability, to recognize the brief intervals when her natural rhythm aligned with perfect shooting conditions. She was developing an almost supernatural sense of timing. "You know," Ghost said as they finished the morning session, "I've trained shooters from every branch of service, from basic marksmen to the most elite special operations units. What you're developing, this adaptive precision, is something that can't be taught through conventional methods." Sofia looked up from cleaning the training rifle, her expression skeptical. "What I'm developing is a way to compensate for brain damage. That's not exactly a marketable skill, isn't it?" Ghost's question was serious, not rhetorical. "Sofia, what do you think happens when a surgeon develops a tremor? Or when a pilot loses fine motor control? Or when any professional whose career depends on precision faces a physical limitation that conventional wisdom says should end their career?" Sofia had never considered the broader implications of what she was learning. She'd been so focused on her own disability, her own lost career, that she hadn't thought about the thousands of other professionals who faced similar challenges. "They adapt," she said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "They find new ways to achieve the same results." "Exactly. And who's going to teach them those new ways? Who's going to develop the techniques, the equipment modifications, the training protocols that make adaptation possible?" The conversation was interrupted by the sound of voices approaching from the direction of the main facility. Ghost quickly began packing up his equipment, his movements efficient and practiced. "We need to go," he said quietly. "Sterling's been asking questions about unauthorized use of the range facilities. Someone's been watching us." As they gathered their equipment, Sofia caught a glimpse of figures moving through the scrub brush about 200 yards away. Derek Thompson and two of his companions, clearly trying to observe their morning session without being seen. "How long have they been watching?" Sofia asked. "Long enough," Ghost replied grimly. "Long enough to know that you're not as hopeless as everyone thinks. And that makes you a threat to the narrative they've built about who belongs here and who doesn't." They made their way back toward the main facility through a different route, avoiding the areas where Derek's group might intercept them. As they walked, Ghost's expression was thoughtful, as if he was calculating variables and making strategic decisions. "Sofia," he said finally, "what I'm about to tell you stays between us. The precision training program I'm running, it's not just about shooting. It's about developing a new model for rehabilitation, one that focuses on capability enhancement rather than disability management." Sofia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "What do you mean?" "I mean that everything you've been told about your limitations, everything Sterling and her team have concluded about your future, Prospects, it's based on conventional thinking about disability and recovery. But conventional thinking assumes that the way things have always been done is the only way they can be done. Ghost's eyes held an intensity that Sofia was beginning to recognize. It was the look of someone who saw possibilities where others saw only problems. There are people in the military, in the medical community, in private industry, who believe that the right training methods can help people transcend limitations that were previously considered absolute. They're interested in studying adaptive techniques, in understanding how the human mind and body can compensate for specific deficits. And you think I'm a candidate for that kind of study? I think you're more than a candidate, Sofia. I think you're a proof of concept. A demonstration that with the right approach, what looks like disability can become a different kind of ability. They'd reached the edge of the main facility grounds, and Sofia could see other veterans beginning their morning routines. In a few minutes, she'd have to report to her basic life skills training, where she'd practice buttoning shirts and writing legibly while everyone pretended her future held more promise than it actually did. But now, for the first time since her injury, Sofia felt like she understood the difference between managing limitations and transcending them. The tremor in her left hand was still there, would always be there. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to define what she was capable of achieving. Same time tomorrow? She asked. Ghost's smile was answer enough. As Sofia walked toward the main building, she noticed Derek Thompson watching her from across the courtyard, his expression unreadable but certainly not friendly. He knew something was different about her, even if he couldn't articulate what that difference meant. Sofia straightened her shoulders and walked past him without acknowledgement, her notebook tucked securely under her arm and her mind already planning the next day's training session. For the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring today. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The confrontation that would change everything began during Sofia's third week at Phoenix, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. She'd completed her secret training session with Ghost, returned to the main facility, and was heading to her occupational therapy appointment when she found Derek Thompson and 4 other veterans waiting for her in the corridor outside the therapy rooms. Well, Derek said, his prosthetic hand tapping against the wall in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. If it isn't our favorite basket case. I hear you've been sneaking around the old firing range before dawn, playing soldier when no one's watching. Sofia's heart rate spiked, but she kept her expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about, Derek. Cut the bullshit, Shaky. The nickname hit like a slap, delivered with casual cruelty that had become Derek's signature. Marcus here saw you coming back from the range yesterday morning with a rifle case. Seemed pretty cozy with Master Sergeant Harrison. Marcus Reed, one of Derek's followers, stepped forward with a smirk. Real question is, what kind of special treatment is our little head case getting? Because last I checked, basic life skills didn't include weapons training. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sofia realized that Derek had been building toward this moment, gathering intelligence and allies, preparing for a confrontation that would either destroy her credibility completely or force her to reveal the training program that Ghost had explicitly told her to keep secret. I'm not getting special treatment, Sofia said, trying to move past the group toward the therapy room. Now if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment. Derek moved to block her path, his artificial hand now pressed flat against the wall. See, that's where you're wrong, Doc. Because some of us have been thinking, and what we realized is that you don't belong here. This program is for veterans who got hurt serving their country, not for people who had nervous breakdowns and decided to play victim. The words were designed to cut deep, and they found their target. Sofia felt the familiar surge of shame and self-doubt that Derek's attacks always triggered. But this time, something else rose alongside the shame anger. 3 weeks of systematic humiliation. 3 weeks of being treated like a damaged object instead of a human being. 3 weeks of watching Derek tear down anyone who showed weakness. "You don't know anything about my service record," Sofia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "And you don't know anything about my injuries." "I know you can't hold a coffee cup without spilling it," Derek shot back. "I know. You failed every assessment they gave you. I know you got assigned to baby training while real veterans like us are working toward actual careers." The other veterans in Derek's group laughed, but Sofia noticed something she hadn't seen before. Not all of them looked comfortable with the direction this was heading. Marcus was still smirking, but 2 of the others were shifting uncomfortably, as if they were beginning to question whether this was going too far. "What I want to know," Derek continued, his voice rising enough to attract attention from passing staff members, "is why someone who can't even tie their own shoes is getting private weapons training while the rest of us follow the rules." Dr. Foster appeared at the end of the corridor, drawn by the raised voices and the cluster of veterans blocking the hallway. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone carrying the authority of someone who dealt with similar situations before. "No problem, Doc," Derek said, his tone shifting to fake innocence. "Just having a conversation with our friend Sofia here about her extracurricular activities." Dr. Foster looked at Sofia, noting her pale complexion and the way her hands were shaking more than usual. "Sofia, are you all right?" It was the moment of decision. Sofia could report Derek's harassment, could tell Dr. Foster about the confrontation and let the facility staff handle the situation through official channels. But doing so would inevitably lead to questions about her morning activities, questions that would expose Ghost's unauthorized training program and potentially end the only thing at Phoenix that felt like progress. "I'm fine," Sofia said, meeting Dr. Foster's concerned gaze. "Just discussing schedule conflicts." Dr. Foster clearly wasn't buying the explanation, but he nodded slowly. "Derek, I believe you have a leadership development session starting in 5 minutes. You don't want to be late." Derek's expression darkened at the dismissal, but he couldn't openly defy a staff member without facing disciplinary action. "You're right, Doc. Come on, guys." As the group dispersed, Derek leaned close to Sofia and whispered, "This isn't over. Shaky. Everyone's going to find out what kind of fraud you really are." The occupational therapy session that followed was a disaster. Sofia's hands shook so badly that she couldn't complete even basic tasks, and her concentration was shattered by the constant replaying of Derek's threats in her mind. Jennifer, the therapist, finally stopped the session early. "Sofia, you seem really stressed today. Is everything okay?" Sofia wanted to scream. Nothing was okay. She was trapped in a facility where her supposed peers had turned her into entertainment, where her disabilities were treated as character flaws, where the only person who believed in her potential was running an unauthorized program that could get them both in serious trouble. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just having a bad day." But the bad day was about to get worse. That afternoon, Sofia was summoned to Amanda Sterling's office for what was described as a routine progress evaluation. She found Sterling waiting with Dr. Foster and a third person she didn't recognize. Stern-looking woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Webb from the Department of Veterans Affairs. "Sofia, please sit down," Sterling said, her tone more formal than usual. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention." Sofia's stomach dropped. Someone had reported the training sessions with Ghost. Someone had decided that her secret progress was either unauthorized or dangerous. And now she was about to lose the only thing that had given her hope since arriving at Phoenix. "Dr. Webb is here to conduct an independent assessment of your progress in the program," Sterling continued. "There have been questions about whether our current approach is meeting your needs." "What kind of questions?" Sofia asked, though she dreaded the answer. Dr. Webb opened a folder and consulted what appeared to be a formal report. Ms. Reeves, we've received information suggesting that you've been engaging in activities outside your assigned treatment plan. Specifically, that you've been participating in unsupervised weapons training despite being assessed as unsuitable for any program requiring fine motor skills. The words hit Sofia like physical blows. Not only had someone reported the training sessions, but they'd framed them as evidence of her instability, her inability to accept her limitations and work within the system designed to help her. I haven't been doing anything dangerous, Sofia said, trying to keep her voice level. I've been working on adaptive techniques with Master Sergeant Harrison, Dr. Webb interrupted, consulting her notes. An instructor who has no official role in your treatment plan and no authorization to work with veterans outside the established protocols. Sterling leaned forward, her expression a mixture of disappointment and concern. Sofia, we understand that acceptance of disability is difficult. But when veterans begin seeking unauthorized treatment or engaging in activities that could be harmful to themselves or others, we have an obligation to intervene. Sofia realized with growing horror that they weren't just ending the training sessions, they were reframing them as evidence of psychological instability. In their minds, her work with Ghost was in progress. It was a dangerous delusion, a denial of reality that proved she needed more intensive intervention. The recommendation, Dr. Webb continued, is immediate transfer to a specialized facility that can provide the intensive psychological support you clearly need. The tremor, the cognitive effects, the apparent inability to accept your limitations, these are complex issues that require expert care, transfer. Sofia understood what that meant. She'd be removed from Phoenix, classified as a treatment failure, and sent to a long-term care facility where the goal wouldn't be rehabilitation but management. She'd become a case study in what happened when veterans couldn't adapt to their new reality. I want to stay here, Sofia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to continue my treatment. Sterling's expression softened slightly. Sofia, I know this is difficult. But sometimes the kindest thing we can do is help someone accept their limitations and find peace within them. Fighting against reality only causes more pain. Outside Sterling's office window, Sofia could see the desert landscape stretching toward the mountains. Somewhere out there was a firing range where she'd been learning that limitations weren't always permanent, that adaptation was possible, that precision could take forms that conventional wisdom couldn't imagine. But none of that mattered if she couldn't prove it to the people who controlled her future. And right now, sitting in this office with three professionals who'd already decided she was delusional, proof felt as distant as the mountains on the horizon. When would the transfer happen? Sofia asked. Within the week, Dr. Webb replied. We want to move quickly before any further unauthorized activities can compromise your treatment. Sofia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She'd spent 3 weeks learning to believe in herself again. 3 weeks discovering that her tremor might be a different kind of strength. 3 weeks working with someone who saw possibilities instead of limitations. And now it was ending before she'd had a chance to prove that any of it was real. As she left Sterling's office and walked through the facility corridors, Sofia felt the weight of every stare, every whispered comment, every moment of mockery she'd endured since arriving at Phoenix. Derek had won. The system had won. The voice in her head that whispered she was broken and useless had won. But as she reached her dormitory room and sat on her narrow bunk, Sofia found herself thinking about Ghost's words from that morning. Precision isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent. Maybe it was time to stop being consistently compliant and start being consistently defiant. Maybe it was time to prove, once and for all, exactly what she was capable of achieving. Sofia found Ghost waiting for her outside the dormitory at 2100 hours, his expression grim in the pale light of the security lamps. He didn't speak, just gestured for her to follow him away from the main buildings toward a maintenance shed that sat in the shadows between the facility and the desert beyond. The shed was unlocked, and inside, illuminated by a single battery-powered lantern, was a small table with 2 folding chairs and a thermos of coffee. "I heard about the meeting with Sterling and Webb," Ghost said without preamble as they settled into the chairs. "Word travels fast in a place like this, especially when it involves someone the staff thinks is having a psychological crisis." Sofia accepted the coffee he offered, grateful for something to do with her hands. "So you know they're transferring me. Probably know I'm being labeled as delusional for working with you. I know they think they understand what's best for you," Ghost replied, his tone carrying an edge of anger that Sofia had never heard before. "What they don't know is that their assessment is based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about disability, recovery, and human potential." For the first time since arriving at Phoenix, Sofia heard someone express genuine anger at the system that had dismissed her so completely. Not pity, not sympathy, but actual outrage at the injustice of what was happening to her. "Ghost, I need to tell you something," Sofia said, setting down her coffee cup. "I appreciate everything you've done, all the training, the belief in my potential. But maybe they're right. Maybe I have been deluding myself about what's possible." Ghost's laugh was short and sharp. "Sofia, let me tell you about delusion. Delusion is a rehabilitation system that measures success by compliance rather than capability. Delusion is a medical establishment that treats symptoms instead of understanding adaptation. Delusion is a society that throws away people like you because their disabilities don't fit into neat categories." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense in the lantern light. "What you've been doing these past 3 weeks isn't delusion, it's innovation. You've been developing techniques that could revolutionize how we think about neurological rehabilitation. And they want to bury that innovation because it doesn't match their textbooks." Sofia felt something stir in her chest, not hope exactly, but a kind of defiant curiosity. "What do you mean, revolutionize rehabilitation?" Ghost was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Sofia, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that officially don't exist. The precision training program I've been running with you isn't just an experiment, it's a proof of concept for a joint Department of Defense and VA initiative that could change everything." The maintenance shed suddenly felt smaller, the shadows darker. Sofia realized she was about to learn something that would either vindicate everything she'd experienced or confirm that she'd been manipulated by someone with his own agenda. There are people in the military medical community who believe that conventional rehabilitation focuses too heavily on managing limitations instead of transcending them. Ghost continued. "They've been developing new approaches, new technologies, new training methodologies that could help wounded veterans not just cope with their disabilities, but actually exceed their pre-injury capabilities in specific areas." Sofia's tremor seemed to intensify as she processed what he was saying. "And I'm what a test subject. You're a collaborator," Ghost said firmly. "Everything we've done together has been with your consent, for your benefit, and with the goal of proving that adaptive precision training can work for veterans with neurological injuries like yours." He pulled a tablet from a bag Sofia hadn't noticed before, powering it up to reveal detailed charts and graphs that looked like scientific research data. "These are your shooting performance metrics over the past 3 weeks. Look at the trend lines." Sofia stared at the data, seeing her progress quantified in ways that made her improvement undeniable. Her accuracy had increased by 300%. Her target acquisition time had decreased by 40%. Her performance under stress conditions had improved dramatically with each session. "More importantly," Ghost said, scrolling to another set of charts, "look at these biometric readings. Your tremor amplitude, your stress response, your cognitive processing speed, All of them have improved significantly since we started training. The implications hit Sofia like a physical blow. You're saying the shooting training is actually treating my neurological symptoms? I'm saying that when you learn to work with your tremor instead of fighting it, when you developed adaptive techniques for precision work, when you rebuilt your confidence through measurable achievement, your brain started healing in ways that conventional therapy never addressed. Ghost closed the tablet and leaned back in his chair. The researchers who designed this program believe that the brain's neuroplasticity, its ability to form new neural pathways, can be enhanced through specific types of precision training. You've been proving that theory correct. Sofia felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the possibility that her secret training sessions had been more than just marksmanship practice. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Because if you'd known you were part of a research study, it would have changed your approach to the training. You needed to develop these skills naturally, organically, without the pressure of knowing that your progress was being measured and evaluated by people you'd never met. The maintenance shed was quiet except for the distant hum of the facilities. Air conditioning systems. Sofia tried to process everything Ghost had told her, tried to understand how her individual struggle with disability had become part of something larger and more complex than she'd ever imagined. So what happens now? She asked finally. Sterling and Webb have already decided I'm delusional. They're transferring me to a long-term care facility where I'll be medicated and managed until I accept my limitations. Ghost's expression hardened. That's exactly what we're going to prevent. Sofia, the people who designed this research program have been monitoring your progress through classified channels. They know what you've achieved, and they're not going to let conventional bureaucracy destroy 3 weeks of breakthrough research. What do you mean? Ghost checked his watch, then stood up from his chair. I mean that in approximately 18 hours, you're going to have the opportunity to demonstrate your capabilities in front of people who understand what they're seeing. People who have the authority to override Sterling's assessment and Webb's recommendations. Sofia felt her heart rate spike. What kind of demonstration? The kind that proves once and for all that adaptive precision training works. The kind that shows everyone who's written you off that they've been measuring the wrong things. Ghost's smile was grim but determined. The kind that requires you to trust everything you've learned and perform at a level that most people will think is impossible. As they prepared to leave the maintenance shed, Ghost turned to Sofia one more time. I need you to understand something. What happens tomorrow isn't just about your future. It's about the future of thousands of veterans who've been told their disabilities define their limitations. You have the chance to prove that wrong, but only if you're willing to take a risk. That could either vindicate everything we've worked for or confirm everyone's worst assumptions about your stability. Sofia thought about Derek Thompson's mockery, Sterling's dismissive assessments, Webb's recommendation for transfer to long-term care. She thought about the notebook full of precision training data, the gradual improvement in her shooting performance, the way her tremor had become a tool rather than a limitation. Most of all, she thought about the person she'd been before her injury, someone who'd run toward danger when lives were at stake, someone who'd made impossible medical procedures work under the worst possible conditions, someone who'd never backed down from a challenge just because it seemed insurmountable. What do I need to do? Sofia asked. Ghost's smile was answer enough. As they walked back toward the main facility under the vast desert sky, Sofia realized that tomorrow would either mark the end of her military identity or the beginning of something entirely new, a different kind of service that she was only just beginning to understand. The tremor in her left hand continued its familiar rhythm, but for the first time since her injury, Sofia heard it as a drumbeat rather than a dirge. Tomorrow she would discover whether that rhythm could carry her toward vindication or deeper into the darkness of institutional dismissal. Either way, she was done being quietly compliant. It was time to show everyone exactly what adaptive precision Looked like when lives and futures hung in the balance. Sofia woke at 0430 without an alarm. Her body's internal clock now perfectly attuned to the rhythm of secret training sessions. But this morning felt different, charged with the electricity of impending confrontation. As she dressed in the pre-dawn darkness, trying not to wake her roommate, Sofia's mind raced through everything Ghost had revealed the night before. In 12 hours, she would either prove that adaptive precision training was revolutionary breakthrough, or confirm everyone's suspicions that she was a delusional veteran who couldn't accept her limitations. The firing range was shrouded in desert mist when Sofia arrived, but Ghost was already there with equipment she'd never seen before. Instead of the modified training rifle she'd been using, several high-end precision weapons were laid out on the shooting bench alongside electronic tablets, measurement devices, and what appeared to be medical monitoring equipment. "Today's different," Ghost said without preamble as Sofia approached. "Today we're not just training, we're documenting. Every shot, every adjustment, every physiological response needs to be recorded and verified." Sofia noticed small cameras positioned around the firing line, their red recording lights already active. "Who's going to see this footage?" "People who matter," Ghost replied, attaching a heart rate monitor to Sofia's wrist. "People who have the authority to override Sterling's assessment and Webb's transfer recommendation. But only if we can demonstrate that your progress is real, measurable, and reproducible." For the next 2 hours, Ghost put Sofia through the most intensive training session they'd ever attempted. Instead of the gradual skill-building exercises they'd been doing, today's program was designed to push her to the absolute limits of her adaptive precision capabilities. The first challenge involved engaging multiple targets at varying distances, while monitoring wind conditions that changed every few minutes. Sofia had to read the environmental factors, calculate adjustments for each target, and deliver precision shots that would demonstrate not just accuracy, but the kind of adaptive thinking that separated expert marksmen from casual shooters. As Sofia settled into her shooting position, the familiar tremor in her left hand began its rhythmic motion. But now, instead of fighting the movement or feeling ashamed of it, she used it as a timing mechanism. She'd learned to recognize the precise moment in each tremor cycle when her natural motion aligned with perfect shooting conditions. "Target 1, 300 yards, quartering wind from the left," Ghost called out, his voice carrying the clinical tone of someone conducting a scientific experiment. Sofia consulted her notebook, checking the wind data she'd been recording since arriving at the range. The flag showed a slight shift from the morning's initial conditions, requiring a half-minute adjustment to her sight picture. She controlled her breathing, found the natural pause in her tremor cycle, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth consistency that 3 weeks of adaptive training had developed. The shot was perfect. Center ring, exactly where her calculations had predicted it would land. Target 2, 500 yards, shifting wind conditions. This shot was more complex, requiring Sofia to read atmospheric conditions that were changing even as she prepared to fire. The wind flags showed conflicting patterns at different distances, meaning she had to calculate not just for the current conditions, but for the conditions the bullet would encounter during its flight path. Sofia's medical training proved invaluable. Here, her understanding of anatomy and physiology translated directly to ballistics. The way a bullet moved through air followed the same physical principles as blood moving through the cardiovascular system or medication dispersing through tissue. The calculations that had once saved lives in field hospitals now guided projectiles to their targets with surgical precision. Another perfect shot. As the morning progressed, Ghost's challenges became increasingly complex. Sofia had to engage targets while dealing with simulated stress conditions, loud noises, time pressure, physical discomfort. The kinds of variables that had destroyed her performance during Sterling's assessments now became just another set of factors to analyze and compensate for. What emerged during these trials was something that surprised even Ghost. Sofia's tremor, which everyone had viewed as a catastrophic disability, was actually providing her with a unique advantage in precision shooting. The constant motion had taught her to find stability within instability, to recognize tiny windows of perfect alignment that other shooters would never notice. More importantly, her medical background had given her an intuitive understanding of human physiology that made her exceptionally good at reading her own body's responses to stress. She could recognize the early signs of fatigue, anxiety, or concentration loss, and adjust her technique accordingly. She was essentially treating herself as a patient, monitoring her condition and prescribing the precise interventions needed to maintain peak performance. Final challenge, Ghost announced as they approached the 2-hour mark. Multiple targets, unknown distances, changing environmental conditions, and time pressure. This simulates the kind of real-world precision scenario where adaptive training either works or fails completely. Ghost had set up 5 targets at distances ranging from 200 to 800 yards, but he hadn't told Sofia the specific ranges. She would have to estimate distances, read wind conditions, and deliver accurate shots to all 5 targets within a 10-minute time limit. It was the kind of challenge that would test not just her marksmanship skills, but her ability to think clearly and adapt quickly under pressure. Sofia studied the target array through her rifle scope, using techniques Ghost had taught her for estimating distances based on target size and atmospheric clarity. The desert air was warming as the sun rose higher, creating thermal layers that would affect bullet trajectory in complex ways. Wind conditions were shifting constantly, requiring her to recalculate adjustments for each shot. But as she began engaging the targets, Sofia felt something she hadn't experienced since before her injury: complete confidence in her abilities. The tremor that had once made her feel helpless now provided a rhythmic framework for perfect timing. The brain injury that had shattered her medical career had also enhanced her ability to process multiple variables simultaneously. The PTSD that made loud noises triggering had also sharpened her awareness of environmental conditions to an almost supernatural degree. Shot after shot found its mark, not just hitting the targets, but hitting them exactly where Sofia intended, with the kind of precision that spoke of complete mastery over both equipment and technique. When the 10-minute timer expired, Ghost walked downrange to check the targets, while Sofia remained at the firing line, trying to process what had just happened. She'd engaged all 5 targets successfully, with shot groups that would have impressed professional competition shooters. More importantly, she'd done it while dealing with the neurological tremor that everyone assumed made precision work impossible. Ghost returned with a tablet displaying the morning's complete performance data: accuracy percentages, reaction times, physiological measurements, environmental conditions, and detailed analysis of Sofia's adaptive techniques. The numbers told a story that was undeniable. Not only had Sofia overcome her disabilities, she'd developed capabilities that exceeded her pre-injury performance levels. "Sofia," Ghost said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and amazement, "what you've accomplished this morning isn't just impressive, it's paradigm-shifting. You've demonstrated that neurological disabilities can become neurological advantages when approached with the right training methodology." As they packed up the equipment, Sofia noticed movement in the distance. A small convoy of black SUVs was approaching the Phoenix facility, too official looking to be routine visitors. Ghost followed her gaze and nodded grimly. "They're here," he said. "The people who've been monitoring your progress, the ones who designed the Adaptive Precision Program. In about 6 hours, you're going to demonstrate everything you've learned in front of an audience that includes some of the most influential people in military medicine." Sofia felt her heart rate spike, but not with the anxiety that had once paralyzed her during evaluations. This was different, the kind of nervous energy that came before important medical procedures. when lives hung in the balance and there was no room for error. "What if I fail?" she asked. Ghost's smile was confident and reassuring. "Sofia, you've already succeeded. Everything that happens from this point forward is just showing other people what you've already proven to yourself." As they walked back toward the main facility, Sofia realized that the secret training sessions were ending, but something much larger was beginning. Whatever happened in the demonstration this afternoon would determine not just her own future, but the future of adaptive precision training. For thousands of veterans who'd been written off as hopeless cases, the tremor in her left hand continued. Its familiar rhythm, but now it felt like a heartbeat, steady, strong, and absolutely ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. At 1400 hours, Sofia was summoned to Conference Room Alpha, the facility's largest meeting space that was normally reserved for quarterly reviews and visiting dignitaries. As she approached the room, she could hear multiple voices through the chi. Closed doors, some familiar, others carrying the crisp authority of military officers and government officials. Her palms were sweating despite the air conditioning, but the tremor in her left hand had settled into its now familiar rhythm, almost like a metronome keeping time for what was about to unfold. Ghost was waiting in the hallway outside the conference room, dressed in full military uniform instead of the casual fatigue she'd grown accustomed to seeing him wear. The transformation was startling: rows of ribbons and medals that spoke of distinguished service, rank insignia that indicated far more authority than she'd realized he possessed, and the bearing of someone who commanded respect at the highest levels of military hierarchy. "You ready for this?" Ghost asked. Though his tone suggested he already knew the answer, Sofia adjusted the notebook tucked under her arm, the same notebook where she'd been recording wind, data and shooting observations for 3 weeks, now thick with documentation that would either vindicate or condemn everything they'd worked toward. As ready as someone can be for something they don't fully understand. Ghost's expression was serious but encouraging. "Sofia, what you're about to walk into isn't just an evaluation, it's a paradigm shift. The people in that room represent a joint task force that's been developing new approaches to veteran rehabilitation for the past 2 years. Your progress has been the proof of concept they needed to move forward with a program that could help thousands of veterans who've been written off by conventional medicine." Before Sofia could respond, the conference room door opened and Amanda Sterling appeared, her expression a mixture of confusion and barely controlled anger. "Sofia, please come in. And Master Sergeant Harrison, your presence is also required." The conference room had been transformed into something that looked more like a military briefing than a medical evaluation. A long table dominated the center of the space, with officials in military uniforms and business suits seated on both sides. Large monitors displayed charts and graphs that Sofia recognized as her training data, and a camera setup suggested that whatever happened here would be recorded for posterity. At the head of the table sat a woman in an Army general's uniform whose presence commanded immediate attention. General Sarah Mitchell. Sofia could see the nameplate from across the room had the kind of bearing that spoke of decades in command positions and the authority to make decisions that affected thousands of lives. "Ms. Reeves," General Mitchell said, her voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "please take a seat. We have some very important matters to discuss." Sofia settled into the indicated chair, acutely aware that everyone in the room was studying her, some with curiosity, others with skepticism, a few with what looked like barely concealed hostility. Sterling sat across from her, flanked by Dr. Foster and the VA representative, Dr. Webb, who'd recommended her transfer just 24 hours earlier. "Before we begin," General Mitchell continued, "I want to establish the context for today's meeting. 3 weeks ago, Specialist Reeves was assessed by this facility staff as unsuitable for any rehabilitation program requiring fine motor skills or stress management. She was assigned to basic life skills training and recommended for transfer to long-term care. Sterling nodded, consulting her ever-present clipboard. That's correct. Ms. Reeves's neurological tremor and cognitive effects from traumatic brain injury made her unsuitable for any meaningful vocational rehabilitation. Our assessment was thorough and based on established medical protocols. General. Mitchell's expression didn't change, but Sofia caught something in her eyes that suggested Sterling's confidence might be misplaced. And yet, during those same 3 weeks, Specialist Reeves was participating in an experimental training program that produced results that directly contradict your assessment. The room fell silent. Sterling's face went pale as she realized that the unauthorized training sessions she'd discovered weren't just rule violations. They were part of a larger program that had been operating with official sanction at levels far above her authority. Dr. Webb leaned forward, her voice carrying defensive urgency. General, with respect, unauthorized experimentation on veterans with traumatic brain injuries raises serious ethical concerns. Ms. Reeves was not informed that she was participating in research, nor did she provide proper consent for experimental treatment. Ghost spoke for the first time since entering the room, his voice carrying the authority of his rank and experience. Dr. Webb, Specialist Reeves provided informed consent for precision training, designed to help her develop adaptive techniques for her neurological condition. At no point was she subjected to experimental treatment without her knowledge or agreement. But she wasn't told she was part of a research study, Dr. Webb pressed. She wasn't informed that her progress was being monitored and evaluated by personnel outside this facility. Sofia realized that the argument swirling around her wasn't really about her welfare. It was about authority, jurisdiction, and competing philosophies of veteran care. Sterling and Webb represented the conventional approach that emphasized managing limitations and accepting disabilities. General Mitchell and Ghost represented something new, an approach that sought to transcend limitations through innovation and adaptive training. If I may, Sofia said, her voice cutting through the debate. Every head in the room turned toward her, and she felt the familiar surge of performance anxiety that had once paralyzed her during medical emergencies. But now, instead of fighting the feeling, she used it as fuel for clarity and precision. I've been listening to everyone discuss my case, my progress, my consent, and my future. But no one has asked me what I think about any of this. Sofia's tremor was visible as she opened her notebook, but her voice remained steady. 3 weeks ago, I arrived here believing that my military career was over, that my identity as a medic was destroyed, and that my best hope was learning to manage my disabilities well enough to avoid being a burden to others. She turned. Sterling, meeting her eyes directly. Your assessment wasn't wrong based on conventional standards. I couldn't perform the tasks you tested, couldn't meet the timelines you established, couldn't demonstrate the stability you required. By every traditional measure, I was exactly the hopeless case you determined me to be. Sterling's expression softened slightly, but Sofia wasn't finished. But what I learned over the past 3 weeks is that conventional standards don't account for adaptation, innovation, or the possibility that disabilities can become different kinds of abilities when approached with the right training methodology. Sofia stood up, her notebook in hand, and walked to the display monitors showing her training data. These charts show my progress in precision shooting, but they represent something much larger. They show that when we stop trying to fix people and start trying to optimize them, when we focus on capability enhancement instead of disability management, extraordinary things become possible. The room was completely silent now, every person focused on Sofia's words and the data she was indicating. General Mitchell, you asked about the context for today's meeting. Here's the context. I'm not the same person who failed your assessments 3 weeks ago. I haven't been cured. My tremor hasn't disappeared, and my brain injury hasn't healed. But I've learned to use these conditions as tools rather than limitations. And in the process, I've developed capabilities that exceed my pre-injury performance levels." Sofia turned to face the entire room, her trembling hand holding the notebook. That documented her transformation. "The question isn't whether I consented to experimental treatment, it's whether you're willing to accept that your assumptions about disability and recovery might be fundamentally flawed." The silence that followed was charged with tension and possibility. Sofia had just challenged not just Sterling's assessment, but the entire medical establishment's approach to neurological rehabilitation. She positioned herself not as a patient to be managed, but as an innovator whose experience could transform how the military treated wounded veterans. General Mitchell was the first to speak, her voice carrying a tone of respectful curiosity. "Specialist Reeves, that's a compelling argument. But arguments aren't proof. Are you prepared to demonstrate that your claimed capabilities are real, measurable, and reproducible under controlled conditions?" Sofia felt her heart rate spike, but not with fear. This was the moment she'd been training for, the opportunity to prove that adaptive precision wasn't just theory, but practical reality. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready to show you exactly what 3 weeks of innovation looks like when lives depend on precision." As the room began to stir with preparations for whatever demonstration was about to unfold, Sofia realized that she was no longer the broken veteran who'd arrived at Phoenix seeking help. She was about to become either a vindicated innovator, whose work would help thousands of her fellow veterans, or a cautionary tale about the dangers of false hope and experimental overreach. Either way, there was no turning back now. The convoy of officials moved across the Phoenix facility grounds like a military operation, which in many ways it was. Sofia found herself walking alongside General Mitchell toward the old firing range, surrounded by Pentagon officials, VA administrators, military medical researchers, and a camera crew documenting what would either be a breakthrough demonstration or a spectacular failure. Behind them, Derek Thompson and a group of other veterans followed at a distance, drawn by the unprecedented disruption to the facility's normal routine. Sofia could hear Derek's voice carrying on the desert wind. "This should be good. Shaky's about to show everyone what we already know, that she's completely delusional." The firing range had been transformed since Sofia's morning training session. Professional measurement equipment lined the shooting positions. Computer systems monitored everything from wind speed to atmospheric pressure, and medical devices stood ready to record her physiological responses throughout the demonstration. It looked less like a shooting range and more like a laboratory where human performance was studied and quantified. "Specialist Reeves," General Mitchell said as they approached the firing line, "I want you to understand what's at stake here. The Adaptive Precision Training Program represents a potential investment of $50 million in research and development, with the goal of helping thousands of veterans who've been written off by conventional rehabilitation methods. Your performance today will significantly influence whether that program moves forward or gets shelved indefinitely." Sofia felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lid blanket. $50 million. Thousands of veterans. The future of an entirely new approach to neurological rehabilitation. And it all came down to whether a trembling woman with brain damage could hit targets with a rifle. Dr. Webb stepped forward, consulting a tablet that displayed Sofia's medical records. "General, I must protest this entire demonstration. Ms. Reeves has documented PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and a neurological tremor that makes precision work extremely dangerous. Subjecting her to this kind of performance pressure could trigger a psychological crisis or cause further neurological damage." "Noted and overruled," General Mitchell replied curtly. "Specialist Reeves is a volunteer participant who has provided informed consent. The medical monitoring equipment will ensure her safety throughout the demonstration." Ghost approached Sofia with a rifle case, not the modified training weapon she'd been using, but something that made her breath catch in her throat. Inside the case was Ghost's personal precision rifle, the custom Barrett M82 that had accompanied him through 3 combat deployments and countless missions. The weapon was a work of art, every component carefully selected, every adjustment precisely calibrated, every surface bearing the patina of expert use and loving maintenance. "Sofia," Ghost said quietly, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment, "this rifle has never missed when it mattered. It's accounted for 47 confirmed save shots that protected American lives in combat zones around the world. Today, I'm trusting it to you, because I believe you understand what it means to take the shot that counts." The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on anyone present. Master Sergeant Cole Harrison, one of the most decorated snipers in military history, was placing his personal weapon, the tool that defined his professional identity, in the hands of a veteran that everyone had written off as hopeless. Sofia accepted the rifle with hands that trembled, but not from fear. The weapon felt different from the training rifles she'd been using, heavier, more substantial, perfectly balanced in ways that spoke of absolute precision engineering. As she ran her hands over the stock and scope, she could feel the history embedded in the weapon, the missions it had completed, the lives it had saved. "The demonstration parameters are as follows," General Mitchell announced to the assembled group. 5 targets at unknown distances ranging from 300 to 1,000 yards. Environmental conditions include shifting wind patterns and thermal layers typical of desert afternoon conditions. Time limit, 15 minutes. Scoring will be based on accuracy, consistency, and adaptability to changing conditions. Sofia moved to the firing position, trying to block out the crowd of officials, cameras, and skeptical voices behind her. Through her scope, she could see the targets arranged across the desert landscape, some obvious, others partially concealed, all waiting for her to prove that 3 weeks of adaptive training had been more than just elaborate delusion. The first target was at 400 yards, a standard bullseye that should have been straightforward. But as Sofia settled into her shooting position, she could hear Derek Thompson's voice from the observation area. $20 says she can't even hit the target stand, let alone the bullseye." The comment triggered a cascade of familiar anxieties. Performance pressure, fear of public failure, the crushing weight of everyone's expectations. Sofia felt her tremor intensify, her breathing become shallow, her vision start to tunnel in the way that had always preceded her worst moments of neurological instability. But then she remembered Ghost's training, remembered the techniques that had transformed her tremor from a limitation into a tool. Instead of fighting the shaking, she embraced it, using the rhythmic motion to time her breathing and find the natural pause between oscillations where perfect stability existed for just a fraction of a second. Sofia consulted her notebook, checking the wind data she'd been recording all morning. The flag showed a complex pattern cross winds at different speeds and directions, depending on distance and terrain features. The kind of conditions that would challenge even expert marksmen, made more difficult by the afternoon thermal layers that were creating vertical air currents. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and settled into the shooting position that Ghost had helped her develop over 3 weeks of intensive training. The tremor in her left hand found its rhythm, and Sofia began to breathe in the controlled pattern that synchronized her physiology with the weapon's requirements. The first shot broke, clean and precise. Through her scope, Sofia could see the bullet impact exactly where her calculations had predicted, dead center of the target's bullseye ring. A murmur ran through the crowd of observers. Dr. Webb's voice was audible. "Lucky shot. She won't be able to repeat that performance under pressure." The second target was at 600 yards, partially concealed behind terrain features that made range estimation difficult. Sofia had to use techniques Ghost had taught her for calculating distances, based on target size and atmospheric clarity, complicated by thermal distortion that made the target appear to shimmer and dance in her scope. But her medical training proved invaluable here. The same skills that had allowed her to assess patients quickly and accurately in chaotic combat environments now helped her read environmental conditions and make precise ballistic calculations. She understood how heat, humidity, and air pressure affected both human physiology and projectile trajectories. The second shot was even better than the first. A perfect bullseye that demonstrated not just accuracy, but the kind of consistency that separated expert marksmen from casual shooters. By the fourth target, the crowd behind her had gone completely silent. Even Derek Thompson had stopped his commentary, staring in disbelief as Sofia delivered shot after shot with mechanical precision. What they were witnessing wasn't just good shooting. It was a demonstration of adaptive capability that challenged everything they thought they knew about disability and performance. The final target was the most challenging, 1,000 yards, positioned to require Sofia to compensate for multiple environmental variables simultaneously. Wind shear, thermal layers, target angle, even the rotation of the Earth would affect bullet trajectory at this distance. It was the kind of shot that professional competition shooters practice for years to master. Sofia took her time, consulting her notebook, reading wind flags at multiple distances, calculating adjustments that accounted for conditions that were changing even as she prepared to fire. The tremor in her left hand continued its familiar rhythm, but now it felt like the heartbeat of precision itself, steady, reliable, perfectly synchronized with her breathing and trigger control. The shot rang out across the desert, and for a moment that seemed to last forever, everyone waited to see where the bullet would impact. When the spotting scope confirmed another perfect bullseye, the silence was broken by Ghost's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, that is what adaptive precision looks like." But Sofia wasn't finished. As she stood up from the firing position, she turned to face the crowd of officials and skeptics who had just witnessed something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about disability and human potential. "General Mitchell," Sofia said, her voice carrying across the desert wind, "the demonstration you just observed isn't the end of adaptive precision training, it's the beginning. What you saw today is proof that when we stop trying to fix people and start trying to optimize them, when we treat disabilities as variables to work with rather than limitations to overcome, extraordinary capabilities become possible." She gestured toward the targets, all bearing evidence of perfect precision, despite being engaged by someone whose hands shook, whose brain was damaged, whose future had been written off by conventional medical wisdom. "The question isn't whether I can shoot accurately despite my disabilities. The question is how many other veterans you're willing to write off before you're ready to admit that your approach to rehabilitation might be fundamentally flawed." In the silence that followed, Sofia realized that she had just delivered more than a shooting demonstration. She had presented a manifesto for a completely different way of thinking about human potential, disability, and the possibility of transcending limitations that had previously been considered absolute. The tremor in her left hand continued its rhythm, but now it sounded like applause. The aftermath of Sofia's demonstration unfolded like a carefully choreographed military operation, but with an energy that spoke of genuine transformation rather than routine procedure. General Mitchell immediately called for a private briefing with her senior staff, while the Pentagon officials huddled around tablets displaying Sofia's performance data with expressions of amazement and calculation. Dr. Webb stood frozen at the observation position, staring through binoculars at the distant targets that bore undeniable evidence of Sofia's precision. Her face had gone pale, and Sofia could see her hands shaking as she lowered the binoculars, not from neurological damage, but from the realization that everything she'd recommended about Sofia's care had been catastrophically wrong. "This is impossible," Webb said, her voice barely audible. "The tremor amplitude, the cognitive load, the stress response, none of this should have been achievable with her documented disabilities." Amanda Sterling approached Sofia with an expression that mixed professional curiosity with personal humility. "Sofia, I owe you an apology. More than an apology, I owe you acknowledgement that our assessment protocols may have been measuring the wrong variables entirely. But it was Derek Thompson's reaction that provided the most dramatic vindication. The veteran who had spent 3 weeks mocking Sofia as shaky, who had led the campaign to isolate and humiliate her, now stood at the edge of the group with his mouth hanging open in genuine shock. His artificial hand hung motionless at his side, and his usual cocky demeanor had evaporated completely. "How?" Derek asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. "How did you make those shots? Your hands shake constantly. You failed every assessment they gave you. You were assigned to basic life skills because everyone knew you couldn't handle real training." Sofia turned to face Derek directly, and for the first time since meeting him, she saw him as what he truly was, not a cruel tormentor, but a wounded veteran who'd been using her perceived weakness to avoid confronting his own fears about disability and limitation. "Derek, I made those shots because I stopped trying to be the person I was before my injury and started learning to be the person I could become after it," Sofia said, her voice carrying none of the defensive anger that his taunts had previously triggered. "My hands still shake, my brain is still damaged. But I learned that those conditions don't have to define my limitations. They can define my adaptations." She gestured toward Ghost's rifle, which she was still holding with reverent care. "Master Sergeant Harrison didn't teach me to overcome my disabilities. He taught me to optimize them, to use them as tools rather than obstacles. The tremor you've been mocking for 3 weeks? It taught me timing and rhythm that most shooters spend years trying to develop. The brain injury that everyone said made me hopeless? It enhanced my ability to process multiple variables simultaneously." Derek's expression shifted from shock to something that looked like genuine curiosity. "You're saying your disabilities made you a better shooter?" "I'm saying that when we stop treating disabilities as defects to be fixed and start treating them as conditions to be optimized, remarkable things become possible," Sofia replied. "Not just for me, for anyone who's willing to challenge the assumptions about what human potential looks like." General Mitchell approached with a tablet displaying real-time analysis of Sofia's demonstration. "Specialist Reeves, I want you to understand what you've just accomplished. Your shooting performance exceeded the qualifications for our most elite sniper units. But more importantly, you've demonstrated that adaptive precision training can achieve results that conventional rehabilitation methods couldn't even conceptualize." She turned to address the entire group of observers. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed today represents a fundamental shift in how the military approaches veteran rehabilitation. Specialist Reeves hasn't just proven that her individual case was misdiagnosed. She's proven that our entire diagnostic framework may be inadequate for understanding human adaptability." Dr. Foster stepped forward, his expression mixing professional excitement with personal vindication. "General, I've been working with Sofia for 3 weeks, watching her struggle with basic tasks that her tremor made difficult. What I realize now is that I was trying to help her compensate for her disability instead of helping her capitalize on it." Ghost approached Sofia and extended his hand for the return of his rifle. But when she started to hand it back, he shook his head with a slight smile. "Sofia, that weapon has served me well through 3 combat deployments, but I think it's ready for a new mission now." His expression grew serious. "I'm recommending you for immediate reinstatement as a sniper candidate, with assignment to the Adaptive Precision Training Development Program. If you're willing, you'll be helping to design and implement training protocols that could revolutionize how we develop precision shooting capabilities for veterans with neurological conditions." The offer hit Sofia like a physical blow. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a washout assigned to basic life skills. Now she was being offered the opportunity to become an instructor in a program that could help thousands of veterans who'd been written off as hopeless cases. "There's more," General Mitchell added, consulting her tablet. The Department of Defense is prepared to offer you a position as a civilian contractor with the Adaptive Human Performance Research Division. Your job would be to work with military, medical researchers, equipment manufacturers, and training specialists to develop new approaches to precision training for personnel with various disabilities. Sofia felt dizzy as she tried to process the magnitude of what was being offered. Not just vindication, but transformation from patient to practitioner, from research subject to research leader. "What about my tremor?" Sofia asked. "What about the brain injury? What about all the medical limitations that brought me here in the first place?" General Mitchell's smile was confident and assured. "Specialist Reeves, your medical conditions aren't disqualifying factors for this position. They're exactly what make you uniquely qualified for it. Who better to develop adaptive training protocols than someone who's personally mastered the art of turning limitations into capabilities?" As the crowd began to disperse, with officials making phone calls and researchers discussing implementation timelines, Sofia found herself standing alone on the firing range where her transformation had begun. The desert landscape stretched toward the mountains, but now it looked different to her, not like a barrier to be overcome, but like terrain to be understood and navigated with precision. Derek Thompson approached her one final time, his expression humble in a way she'd never seen before. "Sofia, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you thanks. Watching what you accomplished today, it made me realize that I've been using other people's limitations to avoid dealing with my own." He gestured at his prosthetic hand. "I lost 2 fingers to shrapnel, and I've been acting like that makes me broken ever since. But if you can turn a tremor into a shooting advantage, maybe I can figure out how to turn this into something useful too." Sofia extended her trembling hand to Derek, and he shook it without hesitation or embarrassment. "Derek, the only difference between us is that I had someone who believed in adaptation instead of limitation. If you want to learn what that looks like, I'd be honored to help." As the sun began to set over the Phoenix facility, Sofia realized that her journey from broken veteran to precision shooting instructor represented something larger than individual transformation. It represented proof that human potential couldn't be measured by conventional standards, that disabilities could become different kinds of abilities, and that the courage to challenge established assumptions could literally change lives. The tremor in her left hand continued, its familiar rhythm. But now it sounded like the heartbeat of possibility itself, steady, strong, and absolutely ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. In her notebook, Sofia wrote a final entry for her time at Phoenix. Day 21. Discovered that the question isn't whether I can overcome my limitations. The question is whether the world is ready to expand its definition of what human capability looks like. Tomorrow she would begin work on training protocols that could help thousands of veterans learn what she had discovered, that sometimes the most profound strength comes from learning to dance with your weaknesses instead of fighting them. 6 months later, Sofia Reeves stood at the podium of the Pentagon's main briefing theater, addressing an audience of military medical professionals, veteran rehabilitation specialists, and congressional representatives who held the power to fund adaptive precision training programs across all branches of service. The woman who had once been dismissed as shaky now wore the confident bearing of someone whose work was reshaping military medicine. Behind her, a massive screen displayed performance data from the first graduating class of the Adaptive Precision Training Program. 23 veterans with various neurological conditions who had been written off by conventional rehabilitation methods. The numbers told an extraordinary story: 89% improvement in fine motor skills, 76% reduction in PTSD symptoms, and 100% successful placement in meaningful employment or continued military service. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sofia began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally traveled the journey from hopelessness to breakthrough. "What you're seeing represents more than statistical improvement in veteran outcomes. You're seeing proof that human adaptability exceeds our previous understanding of what's possible when neurological conditions are treated as variables to optimize rather than defects to manage. In the front row, General Mitchell nodded approvingly. The program that had started as an experimental proof of concept at the Phoenix facility had grown into a multi-million-dollar research initiative with satellite programs at veteran facilities across the country. Sofia's initial demonstration had been so compelling that funding approval had taken less than 6 weeks, unprecedented speed for military bureaucracy. The veteran you're about to meet exemplifies what adaptive precision training can achieve. Sofia continued, gesturing toward the side of the stage. 6 months ago, Derek Thompson was convinced that losing 2 fingers to combat injury had ended his military career. Today, he's a certified instructor in adaptive marksmanship techniques and has developed training protocols for veterans with hand and arm disabilities. Derek walked onto the stage with none of the swagger that had once defined his personality, but with something better, genuine confidence built on proven capability. His prosthetic hand moved with fluid precision as he adjusted the microphone, and his smile carried the warmth of someone who had discovered purpose beyond his own pain. "Ma'am, 6 months ago I was using other people's disabilities to avoid dealing with my own limitations," Derek said, his voice carrying across the theater with clarity and conviction. "Sofia Reeves didn't just teach me new shooting techniques. She taught me that adaptation isn't about accepting what you can't do. It's about discovering what you can do when you stop trying to be who you used to be and start becoming who you're capable of being." He held up his prosthetic hand, flexing the mechanical fingers with pride rather than shame. "This hand will never work the way my original hand did, but it works in ways my original hand never could. I can maintain perfect stability in shooting positions that would cause muscle fatigue in biological hands. I can make micro adjustments with mechanical precision that human fine motor control can't match." What looked like a disability became a different kind of ability. The audience was silent, captivated by Derek's transformation from antagonist to advocate. Sofia watched from the side of the stage, remembering the cruel young man who had made her early days at Phoenix so miserable, marveling at the confident instructor he had become. "The program statistics are impressive," Derek continued, "but they don't capture the most important outcome. Every veteran who completes adaptive precision training leaves with something that conventional rehabilitation couldn't provide: absolute proof that their disabilities don't define their limitations. That changes everything, not just their shooting skills, but their entire relationship with possibility." After the presentation, Sofia found herself in a small office reviewing applications for the next training class. Each file represented a veteran who had been told their injuries made meaningful service impossible: traumatic brain injuries, neurological tremors, PTSD, phantom limb syndrome, and dozens of other conditions that conventional wisdom treated as insurmountable barriers. Ghost knocked on her office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose radical experiment had exceeded every expectation. He was still called Ghost, but now his unofficial title was Director of Adaptive Combat Training Research, and his techniques were being studied by military medical programs around the world. "How many applications this quarter?" Ghost asked, settling into the chair across from Sofia's desk. 237, Sofia replied, sorting through files that represented veterans from every branch of service. All of them written off by conventional rehabilitation programs. All of them convinced they have nothing left to offer. Ghost's smile was grim but determined. "And how many can we accept?" 40 maximum. We're still building capacity, still training instructors, still developing protocols for conditions we've never worked with before." Sofia paused, studying a file from a Navy veteran with severe phantom limb pain who had been told she'd never work with precision equipment again. "It's not enough, Ghost. For every veteran we help, there are dozens more who never get the chance to discover what they're capable of. "That's why we're doing this," Ghost replied. "Every veteran who completes the program becomes a proof of concept for the next expansion. Every success story becomes evidence that the medical establishment's assumptions about disability are inadequate." Sofia's phone buzzed with a text message that made her smile, a photo from Lieutenant Sarah Chun, one of her first students, showing a perfect target from an 800-yard shot made during a competitive shooting match. The message read, "Still using the breathing techniques you taught me. My tremor is now my secret weapon. Thank you for showing me that different doesn't mean defective." Messages like this arrived daily from program graduates who had gone on to careers in law enforcement, competitive shooting, precision manufacturing, and even medical fields where their hard-won understanding of adaptation made them exceptional practitioners. The ripple effects of adaptive precision training were spreading far beyond military applications. That evening, Sofia returned to the firing range at Phoenix, now officially designated as the Adaptive Precision Training Center, for her weekly personal practice session. The range had been expanded and modernized, with equipment that could accommodate veterans with virtually any type of physical limitation. But Sofia still preferred the original concrete benches where her transformation had begun. As she settled into her shooting position with Ghost's rifle, which had officially become hers after his promotion to director, Sofia reflected on the journey that had brought her from broken veteran to program leader. The tremor in her left hand continued, its familiar rhythm as constant and reliable as ever. But now it felt like a metronome marking time for possibilities rather than limitations. She opened her notebook to make the day's wind and condition observations, noting that it had grown thick with training protocols, student assessments, research, data, and correspondence with veterans whose lives had been changed by discovering that their disabilities could become different kinds of abilities. On the final page, she wrote a new entry, Day 203 since demonstration. Realized today that the question was never whether I could learn to shoot despite my tremor. The question was whether the world was ready to learn that human potential can't be measured by conventional standards. Answer: slowly, but yes. Through her rifle scope, Sofia could see new students working with instructors across the range, veterans with various disabilities, learning that adaptation was possible, that limitations could become innovations, that the courage to challenge assumptions could literally save lives. A young veteran with a severe hand tremor was working with Derek at the 300-yard line, learning the timing techniques that had transformed Sofia's shaking from obstacle to advantage. Another student with traumatic brain injury was developing the multivariable processing skills that turned cognitive damage into enhanced situational awareness. Each student represented validation of everything Sofia had fought to prove. That human adaptability exceeded medical understanding, that disabilities could become capabilities, and that the most profound transformations often began with someone willing to see strength where others saw only weakness. The desert wind carried the sound of precision shots across the range, each one proof that when people stop trying to fix what's broken and start optimizing what's different, extraordinary achievements become not just possible, but inevitable. Sofia's tremor continued its rhythm, but now it sounded like a symphony of possibilities, conducted by someone who had learned that the most beautiful music often comes from instruments that refuse to play the same notes as everyone else. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.